This panel is my love, my angle. Please do not treat our friends like potato as we go through. Welcome to Localization, Lost in Translation. I am Bad Batter. Some of you may recognize me from this panel since I do love presenting it and I do love adapting it for every time I bring it out to cons. So some of the content will be new, some of the content will be familiar, and hopefully you will be ROFLing as much as, don't make fun of me. But we are going to have a little bit of education just so we get something to learn from as our IQ drops throughout this panel. So what exactly is localization versus translation? So localization is the goal to convey an intent or tone in a way that makes sense to different audiences, even if the original idea has to be changed. Translation is taking that exact one-to-one, the word in one language, into a word in the other language without really considering what that cultural impact is. So there's a lot of debate about this, whether or not you're on team direct translation or team localization. That is a fine debate to have. We will not be getting into if one is better than the other because there are benefits to both. An example of our localization versus translated, our direct translation is just, oh, gasp! But our edited version, our localized version, may be a gasp. And of course, we have a little bit of our translator comments in there that, George, you suck so much. Although that's so tempted to put le at the beginning. I value my life. Actually, okay, I don't. So one of the big debates over localization versus translation is the idea that localization isn't faithful, which I think is kind of a disingenuous argument, since literal translation is taking that original idea in words and just putting it into the translated words. So sometimes it leads to our clunky English or oddly expressed ideas that don't really have a place. We don't have that same concept in our culture or in our language, and it leads to some gaps where we're like, I don't really understand what was going on, like why are they doing that? So localization is trying to bridge that gap. It is trying to give us a more faithful adaptation because it's giving us the original idea and kind of breaking it down into a way that we can understand that translated idea. That way you get the same experience that someone in the original language would have gotten as they were watching it. So a good example of this is looking at this practice for Kaiju number 8 and kind of comparing some of the practice panels, looking at the original in the target Japanese versus the direct translation where we have Oni-san, Oni-chan. These are those Japanese words, big sister, big brother, but we don't really have that concept in English. We can't just go up to a stranger and be like, oh, you're my big sister, I can trust you, because I've never met you. So when we have that localized version, it's looking at, oh, that's a nice young man. He'll come with you and he'll make you safe. And I think this is a good way to think about localization versus that direct translation. So just a little bit more education before we get to the stupid stuff. Direct techniques is that literal translation, word for word. Borrowing, we're just slapping that bad boy in there. Senpai, udon, sashimi, taking our loan words and putting it in there. We have calc, which is translating expressions directly instead of the shironu ga hotoke, not knowing is Buddha. Not really an expression that we have. But we can use oblique techniques, which are part of our localization process, to transposition, shift things around so they make more sense and flow better in English. Modulation, to change perspective. So instead of like, oh, you know, that sucks, I'm sorry for you, it's like, oh, we're all worried for you. Equivalence, so taking that not knowing is Buddha, ignorance is bliss, something that we understand a little bit better. Adaptation, using those cultural phrases, so throwing in it's raining cat and dogs out there. And compensation, this is when we get into that pure loss in translation. There is no way to bring this into English, so we just kind of gotta put in something a little bit similar. One of my favorite examples of this translation is actually from our uncle from another world.
すぐ四面楚歌になるのね。
待て。お？四面楚歌。異世界なのに楚？楚って中国の国だよね。
翻訳の都合だろうな。直訳だとグベン軍10日目の同国で分かりづらいからいい感じに日本語訳されてるみたいだ。
何このインターフェース。
高文のビデオプレイヤーからパクった。
顔隠したりしないの？
So this kind of gives that example of that calc and equivalence, where that direct translation is meaningless for us. It doesn't have anything that we can understand, so we want to sub it in for something that's a little bit more relatable. So what do you do when you don't have translations that you like from Crunchyroll or Funimation? You're tired of them putting memes in your stuff. You translate it yourself. So we're going to be looking at some of that historical, fun experience of our translators and how scanlations have quite an impact on how we view things today. So one of the most important things is our translator note. Translator note means translator note. So some of them, we add in a little bit of context, information to explain things. So the translator note, baka means idiot, gaijin, short for gaikokojin, meaning foreigner, that means you, buddy, and it just goes on and on and on. So believe in your nakama, help your nakama. We also like to add humor. Now hitting for number 2, catalog, anyone up for cornflakes? And if you recommend watching any more episodes of this, that we do it with a running car in the room. Konosuba, you can choose your subtracts to replace Kazuma with the guy, darkness with boobs, and both of them at the same time. Don't actually watch the OVA like this, or to help us with simple math problems for our classrooms, where the answer sometimes it's hard to understand what's going on with Japan and what some of these words are. So Hanako, thankfully they translate it for us that it's an analogous to John. It's a normal name. Other times we do have to clarify concepts, where translator's note for moo means moo, and that 450 yen is about 450 yen. If that doesn't work for you and you want a different currency, don't worry. 100 million yen is about 370 million Nigerian naira. Sometimes we add in additional information and exposition, such as code geass, explaining the intricacies of chess, because we are playing dirty, and this is too deep of a translator note.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do just do our best with translation, and we just have to kind of sub those things in there. And if not, you can just leave it kind of as is. Sometimes, though, it doesn't matter if you translate it. It didn't make sense in the first place. Explaining Japanese words is very important, such as biribiri, meaning a Japanese onomatopoeia, for sharker, sparky, zappy, zappy in the magnet, Thorfina, the shock blocker, static shock, buzzer, zappet fab, zappet, bzz, Pikachu, microwave, on and on and on.
Why does it say Bill Cosby?
It does say Bill Cosby in there. There's many more ways that you could have translated that. And sometimes you just stuck in the original Japanese. We also keep things in for weeaboo flavor reasons, because that is very important when our translation is working on, to the point that sometimes, it even becomes a little mimetic. In case you're a little young and you didn't quite get it, that was a joke from about a generation ago. So I do want to take some time. I want to look at the good, the bad, ugly kind of highlights I've seen going through working with different series, playing them, looking at good things about them, the bad things about them, and showing you just the really stupid things that are going on. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not to criticize them and say that you're a bad person if you like the translation, because sometimes bad is good. Bad is very, very good. So my guilty pleasure is The World Ends With You. And, I have a lot of feelings about the localization process, but I do enjoy the game, and I think there were some interesting things that happened about it. And it creates a good opportunity to show how translation can make an impact on characters and your story. Shoka is one of the characters that you see throughout the game, and in the original Japanese, her conversations are a little boring. She doesn't have enough personality. Giving that localization gives you the opportunity to make a better connection with a character that, may have not originally come through in the original game. So adding in some more personality instead of just saying bye, telling you later, losers, to the point it becomes a catchphrase. We also have another character who I love, Kay. He does a lot of his conversations through texting you, so it makes sense that, it's 2023, we're going to put in our emojis in our conversations just to show a little bit more of that socialization. Now, that isn't to say that, modern games do come with modern memes. So, this game is just filled to the brim with pop culture references, taking place in Shibuya, looking at street fashion. So we see a couple instances of the word sus appearing throughout the game. Talking about our imposters, perhaps. Now, not to say that's a new thing. This has been existing in the game since the earlier 2014 the live remix version. They do throw sus in there as well because it was still a word before Among Us was a thing, but that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy some of those references and lean into them a little bit, especially when we get to reference things like and If you don't know the full context of this, I highly recommend you go watch the full clip. I do want to keep it PG-13, but for those who know, you know. The Persona series. Some good things. I hear a lot of oh no's. It's not to rag on this. I do have my gripes, and I do have some concerns. The original Persona 5 game, when it came out, we had to keep in mind, what is accessible to English audiences while also keeping the original Japanese game in mind. So there's a lot of things that the original game did really, really bad with. Some of it, just the dialogue between characters, they're not flowing very naturally. It's kind of stilted, awkward conversations for people who are supposed to have, somewhat of a relationship with each other, or to have a more formal, your principal, just kind of ragging on you for being a criminal. And it doesn't flow very well. Some of that problem came from Persona 5 had a ton of dialogue. And so in order to do that kind of work, you need a lot of hands on board. They had 6 different translators working on just moving dialogue from Japanese into English, and 9 different localization editors who are trying to then take all of that English word dump and actually put it into something that makes sense for us. So, this is looking at one of the ways to change that conversation that had occurred and just edit that flow of it a little bit, change that dialogue so it doesn't feel as awkward for reading through. Unfortunately, too, with a lot of series, if there's conversations that are based around Japanese words and concepts, we miss out on that a little bit as English-speaking audiences, and I'll be getting into that a little bit more. One of the conversations in here is between two characters who are talking about dreadnought, and they're talking about doku meaning massive and do coming from dreadnought. But I don't read do in dreadnought, do you guys? No, and that's because we're missing out that dreadnought is a loan word. And so they Romanize it as doredonoto. So they have the do, which they, associate with the doku, meaning massive. And that's just some of the things that I think the Persona series lacks a little bit, is they do focus a little bit on giving you that authentic experience without really taking into account what knowledge and understanding you have with things. Also, because we have so many localizers and editors on the team, we swap between Mr. Kamoshida and Suzui Senpai throughout the game. So just keeping track of what things you're presenting, why this wasn't sensei, why we didn't have, upperclassmen. There are just some decisions that could have been done a little bit better, but when you have so many cooks in the kitchen, you're bound to have mistakes as you go through. Not to say that they haven't fixed things. I think Royal did a good job of revisiting some of the scenes throughout the original Persona 5 game, where there was a lot of critique with your character Morgana that he was kind of a butthole. He sucked as a person, and a lot of that just came through some awkward characterization and dialogue for him. So when they did go back through Royal, they did make some changes to make characters a little bit more enjoyable and to not give them such weird standoffish natures. So there's still some shortcomings with it. They did also change some scenes where they removed some of that weird pedophilia and homophobia that Atlas is really known for. So they're still in there, they're just a little bit more tolerable. But since Persona 5 has such a wonderful translation team, I don't know how many are aware of Persona 3 Reloaded coming out. It's going to be remastered by the Persona 5 team, so I wanted to while we're thinking about that game coming out, looking at some of the comparisons between the base game and what they've shown in clips for Persona 3 to see how things are gonna go. So, the original game, it seems like a lot of the dialogue is still staying the same, keeping some of those answer choices in there, so not major overhauls. But I have seen some changes too, just from my gameplay experience, where a lot of Persona 3, it was just a straight, translate it, dump it. It doesn't matter what's going on. If you don't understand it, that's on you for being American. So, in the original game, you're asked a lot of questions about Japanese authors and concepts that we don't really have a lot of backup for. So it does seem like they have changed some of those questions throughout the game to make it a little bit easier and a little bit more accessible. And also just removing a little bit of weird conversations. Like, I get all geeked up when I eat here. I don't know what Kenji's eating, but I did have some really banging ramen last night, so I kind of get it. So, maybe we geek out a little bit. Of course, too, Atlas and Sega does have some issues where the Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden were translated into Spanish, Italian, German, and French, but their localization team was not properly credited. The only people that were properly credited were the product managers. So we have this awkward situation where if we have bad translators working on games, they get to sneak by and continue to poorly translate things. Vice versa, if we have good translators who are doing awesome work and you love those games, they can't list that on their references. They can't say that they worked on a AAA game, and they can't continue to put out good content. So it's really important that we acknowledge when we have those good translation teams and the good work that they produce, so we can keep them employed and keep them working on good content. Because otherwise, we end up with a lot of fan work. Super Danganronpa 2 is coming out, and this was the only way to read it. So Danganronpa as a series had a fun translation history, where the first game was released in Japan in 2010, the second game was released in 2012, and the third game in sometimes 2017. But we didn't get them in the USA for almost 4 years after their release. And even then, it took a while to come to all consoles. So really the only way for people to read Danganronpa was to literally go online and read it through the Something Awful forums, where it was just one dude grabbing all the screenshots, recording the videos, putting in the sound bites, and working to translate things himself. And there were post limits, there were times you would be locked out completely, and so it was a long waiting game for these. And this was the only way to access Danganronpa for a very long time. There were some other people that came through. Project Zetsubo was a fan team that worked on patching the Japanese game through emulation so English audiences could play the game. And there's a lot of translation differences between the official NISA translation on the left, where they added a lot of extra swearing for characterization, versus what Project Zetsubo or the Something Awful forums would produce. We also get a lot of different variations on what our titles are, where we get the super high school level, which I'm familiar with, versus the ultimate and the super duper from Project Zetsubo. So the official, I'm glad that they officially translated. I'm glad that our Tuchan posting did survive, so we get those references. But, the official did have to change names. They handled some scenes kind of awkwardly. So I'm very excited that we're getting things ported over, like our new Phoenix Wright games, because they were too Japanese for the longest time. So we want to continue seeing games brought over. It just takes a little bit of incentive to get there. What a beautiful crowd. What a beautiful Duwang. There is no other panel like this out here. The rumor goes that a group of Chinese students had to do some assignments for their English class. So they decided to do a translation of Diamond is Unbreakable. Unfortunately, I can't say that they were the best team to be translating this. There's a lot of... Yeah, there are some weird direct translations, but it's also, we have this issue that the original is in Japanese, so it got translated into Chinese. Now we're taking a team of Chinese speakers who don't have the same expertise in English as an official translation team, and then trying to put that out there. And for the longest time, this was the only way to read part 4. This is how I read part 4, and the anime is a treat, let me tell you that. So it is considered a rite of passage for older JoJo fans that you've had to read the Duwang translations. Get a feeling so complicated. Now, you may assume that they did not pass their English class on this assignment, but we do get some wonderful things that continue, such as the translation for abaj, which is an ow or ah, where they read it as a literal A-B-A-J, where the wound is very tiny, but shout. And, we do get to compare some of the wonderful expressions. Looking at the Mona Lisa, we still have that power and that impact where I got a boner. Part 5 also kind of had the same issues for Vento Ario, where it was translated from Japanese into Chinese, back into English, and throughout that process, the more layers you go through, the harder it is to kind of retain that original information and translate it into something that is enjoyable. So the level of content on this is way better the group that worked on this, the Invincible Trio, they did do a lot better with keeping in those original lines and content, but they missed some of that finer nuance with characterization. So a lot of characters were kind of boring and flat because those things just didn't carry over, unfortunately. So I'm thankful that we are getting those official translations, and our scanlations are getting a lot better too, but it's also the accessibility of what we have and what gets translated that way. So speaking of going through multiple layers of translation, Ranking of Kings. This is a series I really liked until some of the later episodes. I'm not going to talk about that, but there is a complicated history with the translation of Ranking Kings. I don't know if everyone is aware of this. So the publishers of Ranking of Kings, Book Live, had released a statement where there were typographical errors and translated phrases impairing the appeal of the original text, which is very corporate speak, that oopsie doopsie, we accidentally stole all of the scanlations for fan work and published it as our own original content. So I'd like you to compare the two pages in front of you. One of them is the official release and one of them is the scanlation. Do you think you can tell the difference between these?
No.
Yeah, unfortunately, the quality of things are bad. But about 67% of the text within the first 3 chapters were directly stolen from the scanlation. And you can argue that if you're translating, if you're doing a direct word for word, maybe you're going to end up with the same content. That there's only so many ways to ask if you were robbed or mugged. Maybe it was bullying, so you're going to have some similarities with that. But there's also some things that can't be explained. One of the conversations, between Kage, they're laughing and screaming, and the scanlation, has a specific amount of laughter and a specific amount of screaming that was not shown the same way in the Japanese text, where they had 9 in the Japanese, translated down to 8, and the official translation lifted that straight from the scanlation rather than taking that same number. So it does look very poorly on Ranking of Kings that they did have this issue. We're looking at getting a redo to not have that work stolen and retranslate that, but it does become an issue that fan translations are technically piracy. This is not legal content for you to read or look through, and it's not legal for them to publish this information. So it could be that they took their intellectual property. I see a hand.
Yeah, I'm wondering, what about if, the translators were to work with the fan artists or fan translators and give credit? Would that, be a solution?
I think that would be an excellent solution, because sometimes we do have our fan translation teams who do make it big and official because we have that recognition, that we are acknowledging that these teams do excellent work, and that happens a lot with fan games too. I know his area of expertise is the Sonic series, which has a ton of fans who love to create new games, and they actually take on some of those fan creators to give them license to make official games. So there is that opportunity to take scanlation teams and take those unofficial translations and incorporate them into official teams. But in the same time, it is disrespectful to take the work directly and claim it as their own without that credit. So there needs to be a little bit more of a middle ground with that. And some of that too may have just been accessibility issues. The original being published in Japanese, most of the fan translations were into Korean, and then we had our scanlation teams working to translate things from Korean into English. So most of it was done by Home Hero Scans, and then we did have another Redditor who was working through translating the series. because of these translation issues where we want stuff to be accessible, we just want to make sure it's done with recognition and done in the right way. Now, some other things, I cannot, there's a lot of translation work that has to go into things sometimes. The Monogatari series, I do not personally watch because it went right over my head. But a lot of it is based on Japanese wordplay and turn of phrase that can't be easily translated over to us. One of the examples here, Hachikuji is talking to Koyomi about what love is, and he asks where it can be found. She's like, oh, you can buy it at the corner store for 298 yen. But we also get additional information that we have love next to it as first love and talent, which is sold out, which are digs at Koyomi. But we also get this kind of double wordplay with the amount that it's being sold for. So 298, Japanese has a whole character reading system where numbers can be read in a variety of different ways. So 298 can be read as ni, ku, hachi. And when you reverse those numbers, you get 892, which can be read as hachikuji. So it's almost taking a wordplay that she's like making a joke like, oh, you can buy my love because it's me. And some of it just, I can't keep up with it because there was so much that we just miss out being an English-speaking audience. Most of Monogatari to me just sounds like this.
Yeah. どうしたにゃ。
猫、僕が今から言う文章を復唱しろ。斜め77度の並びで、泣く泣くいななく7半7台、難なく並べて長々で。
斜め77度の並びでにゃくにゃくいななく7半7台にゃんにゃく並べてにゃがにゃがめ。
If you like the Monogatari series, you are very smart and way smarter than me, so congratulations on making it through that. Speaking of being smarter than me, I don't know if you guys are aware of this series. Cypher Academy, the newest project from our Monogatari Niso Isen, basically incomprehensible. So the translator that was actually working on this project agreed to do about 50 chapters of translation work. After seeing the first couple pages, he was like, oh, okay, I think I'm gonna have to break contract. I'm gonna be able to get through about 30 of them. And then he gets sent stuff like this, and he's looking at it, and he's like, oh, no, I'm doing about 10 chapters, and I'm dipping. I cannot work with this. And some of that is that Cypher Academy is a very linguistic-based series that is all around Japanese language and words and the way that it is formed. So one of the things that I'm showing on screen is a lipogram-based cipher between two of the characters. And a lipogram is a word association game where you have to avoid using the combination of syllables or letters. So one of the characters asks them to talk about some of the famous manga series without using the forbidden consonants and vowel combinations. Now, some of these things we don't have, and there's not a good way to translate it because the English translation is going to use a bunch of different letters and characters and pronunciations that aren't there in the Japanese. And so the best way to kind of handle that situation is where we're just kind of grabbing it and plopping it onto the page. Where we get the Japanese pronunciations, we get kind of that direct translation of what she said in that romanji, and then we get the translation of what that actually says. And so for English-speaking audiences, it's lost on a lot of us, kind of that higher level wordplay that's going on that Japanese audiences get to have a little bit more accessibly. Another one is looking at a poem that the pentagram uses the classical hiragana characters once, and they have to assign it into the different prefectures as initials. And I don't think there's a really good way to make an equivalence to this in English. So I can absolutely understand why the translator looked at this and went, nope, because there's not a good way to do a service to this while keeping original content, but also making it accessible. Moving away to higher level things, we want to take a quick look at some double layers with our translations. So I have Excel Saga using the Animation USA episode that I will share.
ジャパニメーションにはジャパニメーションのアメリカにはアメリカの良さがある。それがアニメの素晴らしいところ。だがそこに目を向けることなく私利私欲に走る者を私は許さない。そんな奴らは好きに変わって知りてんや。
それちょっち前のジャパニメーションセーラーですね。だがしかしもう終わっちまったアニメね。
So I don't know if you guys are aware of the Japanese voice actresses for Excel. Oh, I see one. Haha, you get this joke. No one else in the room has yet. 2, 3, a couple. So you guys are clued into the fact that the voice actress for Excel, Kotono Mitsushi, is also the voice actress for Sailor Moon. So we have kind of this layered, we're referencing her voice actress for another series. But we come into an issue when we get to the English version where they do not share the same voice actress.
Senseless fighting!
Who's it?
I'm here, that's who! First name Excel, last name Excel, occupation main character!
No, it's another possible. Ooh, a cosplayer.
Señorita Excel! Japanimation and American cartoons both have their good points. That's what's so great about animation. There are no limits. However, there can be no excuse for those who use animation to exploit innocent children. That pisses Excel off. You've all been bad boys. So in the name of the tunes, Excel will punish you.
Ooh, that's from a Japanimation from just a while back, isn't it? Now, what was it called? Oh, it was called a Sailor Moon. Oh, but that's so old and a cliche that only kids watch it.
It's not just for kids. I wanted that part, but it was dubbed in Canada.
So, even though we miss out on some of the original jokes, we do a good job of kind of making up our own, which there's a lot of series that like to make up their own. Get my slide to translate. So set in the year of 2808, the city of Oita, Tokyo, tells the stories of 3 criminals. So produced by Madhouse and licensed by Manga Corp. I'd just like to share a very good scene from the anime to maybe get your interest in it, and it's wonderful translation work.
Don't crap your pants if you see a vampire out there.
Get lost. You wouldn't recognize a goddamn vampire if one jumped up and bit you on the end of your f***ing. So just get off my back.
So sometimes we get some excellent translation work going.
Hey, Benton.
Sometimes we get really good translation work. Rumor says Saibon Entertainment either didn't receive the scripts of the original dialogue, lost them, or just decided to have fun with it in their poorly translated way. So we had to make things up. This is our Samurai Pizza Cats.
Will somebody please cue that boy?
Oh yeah! Who do you call when you want some pepperoni? Right on! They're standing on crime, and you know that ain't baloney. The speedy ceviche, he's the leader of the bunch. A heck of a bite makes a heck of a lunch. And little polyester, who's never afraid of going into battle with the bad guys today. sweeto anchovy, a wild romantic rover. The cat gets down with a love hangover. They're so bad, they've got more fur than any turtle ever had. Stronger than old cheese, stronger than dirt. They're fighting crime all over town. 3, 2, 1. The big chief is the villain who's lower than low. It's a rotten shame he lives in little Tokyo. We've got a nasty bad bird and some nasty ninja crows. As soon as the one finds us, we right begin the show. Sit right back, kick up your feet and turn the sound up high. And if you want the full effect, go eat a piece of pie.
If you guys are a fan of TMNT, I highly recommend that you watch the English dub for Samurai Pizza Cats. This is so prolific that the international fans have kind of agreed that the dub is way better than the original because of all of the references, the puns, and just the sense of humor that it really took from TMNT. Normally, this show would have never crossed over into the Western audience just because of the overwhelming Japanese nature that it originally had. And, you know, by making it something that's a little bit more recognizable and a little bit more accessible, it has just blossomed into a wonderful series.
Oh.
So we get a couple different versions sometimes of animes when they're brought over. So the original DVD was released by Anime Network or AD Vision. And so there were 2 English dubbed versions that came out. A direct translation that used the Japanese script kind of word for word. And then we got an Adult Swim version of the series that I think a lot of people have as the preferred. So the original, for context, is rated as TVPG. English dub for the translated is the TV-14. And the alternative Adult Swim release, of course, is TVMA. So I'd like to show a couple of the comparisons for the scene that I think does an excellent job with that translation versus localization.
ああ、そんなくだらない記事に夢中になれて羨ましいわ。何がくだらないのよ。デートの時のレストラン選びは女の子にとって深刻な問題なのよ。あんまり笑わせるな。それよりこれ見てよ。新聞。何。そうなのよ。新宿区のサラリーマン、女装をからかわれて同僚宅に放火。ミルク、大事件じゃない。そこじゃない。株が下がったの。株ってミルク、あんた株なんか持ってるの？持ってるなんてもんじゃないわよ。ここ3ヶ月で200万も損してるんだから。200万ってバカ。子供のくせにすぐやめなさい。うるさい、このおたんこナース。おたんこ。子供だって社交心ってものがあるんだよ。いい？ミルク、株っていうのはね。電話だ。はい、徹子。残念ながらお説教はそこまで。大統領からの指令かな。
Man, I sure wish I could get caught up in long, boring articles like that too. Oh, what's boring about it? Choosing an elegant restaurant for a romantic date is a very serious problem for girls.
You dumbass! Don't make me laugh too much. Anyway, take a look at this.
What? The newspaper? Well, let's see. What?
Isn't it though?
A Shinjuku businessman was teased for his and set fire to a coworker's house? Oh, Milk, this is big news.
You dumbass! Not there. The stocks went down.
What? What stocks? Oh, Milk, you're telling me you own stocks? You dumbass! I lost 2 million yen in the last 3 months. 2 million yen in the last 3 months. 2 million? Idiot, you're only a child. Stop it right away. Shut up, you big fat dummy. Dummy? Even little kids have a speculative spirit. Listen to me, Milk. Stocks are strictly Oh, telephone. Sorry, Tetsuo, but that's all the lecturing I have time for. Maybe it's an order from the president. Really? Oh, man. I wish I was as bubble-headed as you are. Then I could get lost in stupid magazines like that.
Milk, this magazine isn't stupid. It's gonna help me plan a perfect date. You'll understand when you're older. Now, don't be so cranky.
You shut up! Quit telling me what to do! I have every reason to be cranky! Take a look at this!
Oh, the newspaper. I hate reading the paper. It's depressing.
See why I'm cranky now?
After being teased for his the suspect set fire to his co-worker's house. You know, Milk, I like the paper.
Dumbass! Jesus Christ, not the stocks, you idiot! Look at the NASDAQ!
What? The NASDAQ? Oh, Milk, what are you doing playing the stock market?
Just read it! Did you see what happened to my media stock? I lost a fortune! I'm cleaned out! Busted! Gay stockbrokers are not a good thing!
You're making a fool of yourself. You have no business playing in the stock market. You're just a child.
One more crack about my age and I'll turn you into an aquarium!
It's not funny.
No, it's not, but at least I'm trying to find ways to get us some cash.
Oh, Milk, the complexities of investing in the market during this economy.
Whoa, telephone. Gee, and I was so looking forward to hearing your wise appraisal of the Dow. Big mouth, know-it-all, go back to your weak people knockoff.
I love presenting this series every time, but there are always better and more beautiful translations to get into. So take some time to appreciate the true classic, the one who started it all. Our wonderful comparison of our Japanese versus English ghost stories dub.
学芸会は中止かしらね。
困ります。ゆうべ僕は徹夜で衣装と小道具を作ってきたんですよ。
まあ、レオさん器用なんですね。I guess the School of Fine Arts Festival's not gonna happen.
I can't believe it. And I stayed up all night working on my custom and props.
Oh my, what a gifted seamstress. I hope you're not a homosexual.
本当に呪いの階段だったら本番中にレオさんの首が
練習中にだってもっと不吉な事故が起きればいい。
どうしてそういうこと言うのよ
Shut up, Cat! And listen, you don't know Leo well enough to be mean to him, just us!
What if curses are true? Leo will be killed and go to hell.
The rehearsals are cursed too. It might be curtains even before opening night curtain.
You can be such a you know that?
そのここから出せ。奴が動き出したんだ。見たんだよ。
騙されちゃダメよ、圭一郎。そいつはカゴから出してもらいたいだけなんだからね。さあ、急ごう。
I'm telling you, kid, you gotta let me out of here. An old buddy of mine just showed up, and that's never a good sign.
Don't listen to him, Petro.
Shut up, Cat. I'll cover up those there vents with duct tape if you say one more word. All right, let's go.
お前は俺のこと信じてるんだろ。だったらここから出せよ。
でもさっきお姉ちゃんが。
なんだ。お前まで俺は犯人扱いすんのかよ。
わかった。天の弱それがカゴから出しちゃったのだってあいつどこ行ったのあっちの方何やってんのよあいつがいないとお化けの正体がわからないじゃないだって
I'm getting a little lightheaded. I think I'm running out of air. You don't let me out. You're a cat killer.
But they told me not to do that.
I guess you always do what your big sister tells you to do.
Okay.
Later.
Keturah!
Where's the cat?
Obviously. Which way did he go? Now we'll never find out who the ghost is. I hope to God you're adopted.
もう今日学芸会なんだろ。昼間にやかましくできねえから夕べのうちに削り取っちまったんだ。
That staircase is gone. Don't suppose you know anything?
Yeah, some drama teacher paid us to tear it down. Now, if you don't mind, I gotta get home to my trailer wife and kids. Bet you can't wait to get older.
I think she's right. You are.
心配してないで。とっとと働け。
あれあの井戸どうします？
ああ、適当に埋めとけ。
What are you, city council? Shut your yap and get back to work.
And the well? You still haven't told me what we're gonna do with that.
Whatever. Just fill the hole filler.
Sure.
私白旅だけが私に優しくしてくれたの。今井さん、白旅が死んだ時は悲しくて一緒に死なんかと思った。だってまた一人ぼっちになっちゃったんだ。
This is a very touching scene in your life.
白旅が生き返ってくれて、私にはできない。
あれが本当に白旅か。お前の唯一の友達なのか。
白旅を止められるのはあなただけよ。早く眠らせてあげて。あらばくだばらファミラパリラさん。あらばくだばらファミラパリラさん。あらばくだばらファミラパリラさん。白旅、ごめんね。
Because none of the other animals would be my friend but Shirotabi. Sometimes when we were together, I feel he would actually talk to me.
You are pathetic.
When he died, I was so sad that I would never hear that voice again. His laugh. His funny little requests.
Touch me.
His reprimands.
Touch me harder.
Come on! You stupid, selfish. Does he look happy to be back? Huh?
Sentimental flashback time is over, you stupid bunny-loving If you don't throw that thing, I'm tossing you!
Shirotabi, please forgive me for bringing you back to life. I know now that it could never work between us. As much as we wanted to, it could never be. Not because you're a rabbit, but because you're black.
Oh, perfect. It's in Japanese. Jinchao Nongan Town. Wait, that's Chinese. Luckily, I can read barricade.
Hey there, what are you kids doing here? School's over. Go home, you sillies.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, nice cat.
We have a wonderful assortment of localization and translation projects. Thank you guys for sitting in here and listening to our poorly dubbed, worsely subbed, and altogether excellent anime. I highly recommend you log into your accounts, whether legal or non-legal, and procure some wonderful anime and manga to read. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you all next time.